At the charity auction, I reached for my husband's hand under the table. He jerked away like I'd burned him. Not here, he hissed through his teeth, his smile still fixed for the crowd. You're suffocating me. I need room to breathe. With a steady hand I didn't know I possessed, I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on the white tablecloth. The diamond caught the chandelier light as 300 of Boston's elite watched my marriage end between the silent auction and the lobster bisque. Consider yourself free, I said, loud enough for our table to hear. That was 4 nights ago. Now I stood in my kitchen at 5:30 inches the morning, listening to a recording on my phone that would destroy everything my husband had built. His voice filled the marble and granite space he'd designed himself, every word a knife. She's falling apart. Everyone saw it at the auction. A few more public incidents and no judge will give her custody. Sophie will be ours by summer. The woman's voice that followed belonged to Vanessa Hartwell, his business partner. The woman I'd suspected for months but couldn't prove. The London office is ready. Once the custody ruling comes through, we disappear. Sophie adapts. Kids always do. My daughter's name in that woman's mouth made me grip the counter until my knuckles went white. Sophie was 7 years old. She still believed her father hung the moon. She didn't know about the secret meetings, the hidden accounts, or the elaborate plan to steal her from me and vanish across an ocean. The coffee maker beeped. I poured my husband's espresso into his favorite mug, the one Sophie had painted at summer camp with wobbly letters spelling "World's Best Dad." The irony tasted like ash. Footsteps on the stairs. He descended in his charcoal Armani suit, not even glancing my way as he reached for his coffee. "You're up early," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Couldn't sleep." He took a sip and grimaced. "It's cold." I watched him pour it down the sink, feeling nothing. Must have lost track of time. He left without kissing me goodbye, without checking on Sophie, without looking back at the family he was planning to destroy. The front door clicked shut with its usual whisper, but today it sounded like the starting gun of a war he didn't know he'd already lost. 4 nights ago, everything changed. But I'd spent those 4 nights preparing, not crying. The woman who placed her ring on that tablecloth wasn't broken. She was finally awake. Before I continue, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If you believe that betrayal should have consequences and that mothers deserve to fight for their children, consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps more women find strength in these stories. The charity auction had been circled on our calendar for months. The Children's Hospital Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, and my husband had been on the planning committee. He'd bought me a new dress for the occasion, navy blue and conservative, nothing that would draw attention away from his role as the evening's star donor. I'd spent hours getting ready, hoping the formal setting might remind him of our wedding reception 12 years ago when he'd held me close during our first dance and whispered that I was his entire world. Instead, I became the entertainment. When I reached for his hand under the table, a simple gesture of connection, he recoiled like I'd offered him poison. His face twisted with disgust that he didn't even try to hide. "You're suffocating me," he said, and every word carried to the neighboring tables. "I need room to breathe." "Do you have to be so desperate all the time?" The silence spread outward like ripples in a pond. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations died. Every eye at our table, then the surrounding tables, then half the ballroom, turned to witness my humiliation. Something inside me cracked, not broke, cracked. Like a shell finally giving way to whatever was growing inside. I removed my wedding ring slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone could see. The 5-carat diamond he'd custom designed when we were young and actually in love caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. "Consider yourself free," I said, placing it on the tablecloth between us. Then I walked to the ladies' room with my head high, refusing to give anyone the collapse they were waiting for. My best friend Margot found me gripping the marble sink, fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with the champagne. "Half the room thinks you're the bravest woman in Boston," she whispered, holding my hair back. "The other half thinks you've lost your mind." Maybe both are true. Through the bathroom door, we heard voices from the hallway. 2 women from the junior league, their whispers carrying clearly. "Did you see Marcus leave with Vanessa right after?" They didn't even try to hide it. Poor thing. Everyone knows except her. Margot's hand tightened on my shoulder, but I was already moving, slipping out of the bathroom and following the trail of expensive cologne and designer perfume through the hotel's service corridors. I found them in a private meeting room, heads bent together, laughing at something on his phone. My phone was already recording when I positioned myself behind a decorative screen, close enough to hear everything. 8 months of planning, and it worked perfectly, Vanessa said, satisfaction dripping from every syllable. She looked completely unhinged. No judge will give her custody after that display. The Singapore accounts are ready, my husband replied. Once the divorce is finalized, we transfer everything. She gets the house with its underwater mortgage. I get freedom, Sophie, and you. Poor, pathetic wife. So desperate for affection she'll beg for it in public. Vanessa's laugh was poison. Sophie will forget her within a year. Children are resilient. I stayed frozen behind that screen while they detailed their plans. London, where American custody orders meant nothing. Shell companies hiding assets I didn't know existed. A folder on his laptop filled with edited security footage designed to make me look mentally unstable. When they finally left, still laughing at my expense, I remained in the shadows with blood dripping from where I'd bitten my palm to keep from screaming. My marriage hadn't just ended that night. It had been murdered, slowly and deliberately, by the man who'd promised to love me forever. The morning after the gala, I started digging. My husband left for the office at his usual time, humming something tuneless, completely unaware that his wife had spent the night copying files from his laptop instead of crying into her pillow. His password was Sophie's birthday. He used it for everything, never imagining I'd have reason to look. What I found made the affair look like a parking ticket. 3 years. For 3 years, he'd been laundering money through his real estate development company, properties bought for cash, renovated with inflated invoices, sold to overseas buyers who didn't exist. The paper trail wound through Singapore, the Caymans, and finally to accounts in London that held nearly $4 million of hidden assets. But the money wasn't the worst part. A folder labeled insurance contained hundreds of video clips from our home security system. Each one had been carefully edited to remove context, creating a devastating portrait of maternal instability. There I was, throwing a wine glass at the wall. They'd cut the part where I'd just found lipstick on his collar. There I was, sobbing hysterically in the kitchen. They'd cut the part where he'd told me my father's cancer had returned. There I was, screaming at Sophie over spilled juice. They'd cut the 36 hours I'd been awake nursing her through stomach flu while he worked late with Vanessa. Every clip was time-stamped, documented, ready to present to a family court judge as evidence of my unfitness as a mother. He'd been collecting ammunition for over a year, engineering conflicts when the cameras were positioned just right. I copied everything to 3 different drives, then emailed it all to a secure account he didn't know existed. That evening, Sophie bounced into the kitchen for dinner, her school uniform rumpled from a day of first-grade adventures. "Daddy's friend Vanessa is really nice," she announced, pushing peas around her plate. "She picked me up from school yesterday when Miss Margot couldn't. She bought me ice cream and asked lots of questions." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "What kind of questions?" Sophie shrugged, already losing interest. "Just stuff. Like if you cry a lot or if you get angry sometimes." She looked up at me with innocent eyes. "I told her you only cry when you think I'm sleeping." The room tilted. My 7-year-old had been interrogated by my husband's mistress, bribed with ice cream to report on my mental state. Every frustrated moment, every exhausted tear, fed back to build a case against me. What else did Vanessa ask about? She wanted to know if you drink the grown-up juice a lot. I said only sometimes with dinner. Sophie smiled. She said I was a good helper. I managed to keep my voice steady through the rest of dinner, through bath time, through 3 bedtime stories and a glass of water. But once Sophie was asleep, I sat in the hallway outside her door and let the rage wash over me in waves. They were grooming my daughter to testify against me. Using dolls and ice cream to turn her into a weapon. The email arrived 3 days after the gala. Diane Mercer. The name didn't register at first, but her message stopped my heart. "I know what they're planning. We need to talk." Her LinkedIn profile read like a manual for catching financial criminals. Forensic accounting certifications, expert witness testimony in federal cases, a reputation for finding money that powerful people wanted to stay hidden. But it was her maiden name that made me respond. Hartwell. Before her marriage, Diane had been Diane Hartwell, Vanessa's former sister-in-law. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far enough from the financial district that no one from my husband's circle would wander in. Diane arrived exactly on time, moving with the controlled precision of someone who'd learned to channel anger into purpose. "Vanessa destroyed my brother," she said without preamble, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Drained his accounts, fabricated evidence of affairs that never happened, convinced a judge he was unstable. David ended up with supervised visitation and a mountain of debt while she walked away with everything." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between us. "When I heard she'd attached herself to your husband, I started watching. What I found goes far beyond another ruined marriage." The flash drive contained 6 months of investigation. Bank records showing millions in suspicious transfers. Emails between my husband and Vanessa discussing something called Project Phoenix, their code name for a new life funded by stolen assets. A trail of shell companies leading through 3 different countries to a final destination, London, where American custody orders were just suggestions. "They're not planning a divorce," Diane said, pulling up a new screen. "They're planning a kidnapping." 3 plane tickets appeared on her phone. One way to London, departing Friday at 11 p.m. The names were aliases, but the credit card history she'd somehow accessed made the identities clear. Marcus Wright traveling as James Anderson, Vanessa Hartwell traveling as Sarah Anderson, and Sophie Wright traveling as Emily Anderson, with a passport that should never have existed. "The passport," I whispered. "Sophie doesn't have a passport." "She does now." They used forged consent documents. It arrived last week at a P.O. box registered to one of Vanessa's shell companies. The coffee I'd been drinking came back up. I barely made it to the bathroom in time. They weren't fighting for custody. They were planning to steal my daughter and disappear. Diane had a third member for our alliance. Frank Delano, a retired private investigator who'd spent 20 years with the FBI before going private. He arrived at my house the next morning dressed as a cable technician, complete with a van full of surveillance equipment. "Your husband's home office is wired," he murmured, pretending to check my internet connection while my husband worked in the next room. "Living room, kitchen, hallway outside your daughter's room, everything goes to a secure server. Whatever he says, we'll have." The devices proved their worth that night. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, listening through an app on my burner phone as my husband video called Vanessa. "The fertility clinic in London is highly recommended," Vanessa was saying. "We could start trying once we're settled. Sophie needs siblings." "Our children," my husband replied, and I heard the smile in his voice. "I want them close in age. Sophie will adjust. Kids forget fast. Our children." He was already planning a family with her, using my daughter as the foundation. "The custody hearing is Thursday," he continued. "With the video evidence and Sophie's statements about her mother's instability, it should be straightforward. The judge will grant temporary custody pending the divorce. We board Friday night. And if something goes wrong, then we have the passport. Either way, Sophie is on that plane." I sat in that parking lot until the call ended, until the screen went dark, until my hands stopped shaking enough to drive home. Thursday. I had until Thursday to destroy everything they'd built. Diane, Frank, and I met in a borrowed conference room, the same space Diane used for her legitimate forensic accounting business. Whiteboards covered every wall, each one filled with evidence, timelines, and the elaborate web of deception my husband and Vanessa had woven. "The FBI fraud division is interested," Frank said, pulling up encrypted communications on his laptop. "My contacts confirmed they've been building a case against Vanessa's financial schemes for months. Your husband's involvement gives them the connection they needed. But we can't wait for a federal investigation," Diane added. "Sophie is on a plane Friday night. We need to act before then." I stared at the whiteboard showing my husband's planned testimony for the custody hearing. Every lie documented, every fabricated piece of evidence catalogued. He was going to stand before a judge and claim I was mentally unfit, using videos he'd engineered and statements he'd manipulated my daughter into making. "What if we don't wait for him to attack?" I said slowly, an idea forming. "What if we expose everything at the hearing itself?" The plan came together over the next 18 hours. Frank knew a court clerk who could arrange for our evidence to be entered into the record. Diane had already prepared expert testimony on the financial crimes that no legitimate accountant could refute. My own attorney, a bulldog of a woman named Grace Chen, had been updated on everything and was ready to pivot from defense to attack. But the real weapon would be my husband's own voice, recorded in our home, detailing every crime he thought no one could hear. The The night before the hearing, I cooked my husband's favorite meal, chicken parmesan, Sophie's pick, with the good wine and the nice china. He smiled across the table like a man without a care in the world, spinning stories about weekend plans he had no intention of keeping. The zoo on Saturday? Sophie's eyes lit up. And bike riding in the park? Whatever you want, sweetheart. He reached over to ruffle her hair, and for a single instant, something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe. Or the ghost of the man he used to be. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. After dinner, I watched him tuck Sophie into bed, heard him promise her the world, saw her wrap her small arms around his neck with perfect trust. He closed her door with a soft click, and I realized he was saying goodbye. He just didn't know it was goodbye to everything. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Boston spring that couldn't decide between winter and something kinder. I dressed in the black suit I'd worn to my father's funeral, applied lipstick the color of dried blood, and woke Sophie for school with hands that didn't tremble. Is today a special day? She asked, watching me in my formal clothes. Just some grown-up business, sweetheart. Margot will pick you up after school. Not Vanessa. Never Vanessa again. The courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its granite facade promising justice whether or not it could deliver. I arrived early, watching the lawyers and defendants stream past, each one carrying their own secret weight. My husband walked in at 9:15, Vanessa beside him in a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. His attorney, a slick man named Harrison Reed who charged $800 an hour, led them to the defendant's table with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. My own attorney caught my eye and nodded slightly. Everything was in place. The Honorable Catherine Walsh took the bench at 9:30 sharp, a woman with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been on the family court for 20 years, and rumor had it she could smell deception from the parking lot. In the matter of right versus right, petition for temporary custody, she began. Mr. Reed, please present your client's case. My husband's attorney stood, smoothing his expensive tie. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that Mrs. Wright poses an immediate risk to the minor child's well-being. We have video evidence of erratic behavior, witness statements documenting emotional instability, and the minor child's own accounts of her mother's concerning conduct. He clicked a remote, and a screen lowered behind the judge's bench. The first video showed me screaming, throwing objects, looking every bit the unstable woman they wanted to paint. I watched Judge Walsh's face as the clip played, watched her expression shift from neutral interest to something darker. Your Honor, Grace Chen interrupted, rising slowly. We have additional video evidence that may provide context for these clips. Objection, Reed said smoothly. This evidence wasn't included in the original filing. Relevant materials were submitted to the court this morning, along with a motion to address newly discovered evidence of criminal activity. Grace's voice carried like a bell through the courtroom. Evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings. Judge Walsh's eyes narrowed. I'll allow it. Present your evidence, counselor. The screens changed to show the complete footage. Each clip now including what my husband had so carefully edited out. The wine glass throwing, preceded by the lipstick-stained collar. The kitchen breakdown, triggered by news of my father's cancer. Every manufactured moment revealed as exactly that, manufactured, but the real evidence came next. Your Honor, the respondent has in his possession video and audio recordings obtained through surveillance equipment installed in my client's home. Grace clicked to the next screen. These recordings were made without my client's knowledge or consent. However, Mr. Wright was himself recorded by the same equipment, discussing plans that constitute criminal conspiracy. My husband's face went pale as his own voice filled the courtroom. The Singapore accounts are ready. Once the divorce is finalized, we transfer everything. Then Vanessa's voice. Sophie will forget her within a year. Children are resilient. Then both of them, laughing about the passport, about the plane tickets, about Project Phoenix and the new life they were planning to build on stolen money and a stolen child. The recordings played for 7 minutes. Every scheme exposed, every crime documented, every word of contempt for me and every callous plan for Sophie preserved in digital clarity. When the audio ended, the courtroom was silent. Vanessa was already edging toward the exit, her face ashen. My husband sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Judge Walsh removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. In 20 years on the bench, I doubt she'd heard anything quite like this. Bailiff, she said quietly, please contact federal authorities. It appears we have more than a custody dispute to address. The doors opened before Vanessa could reach them. 2 FBI agents in standard-issue suits entered with the calm efficiency of people who'd done this hundreds of times. Vanessa Hartwell, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit international parental kidnapping. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists with a sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. Her designer dress seemed to mock her now, silk and status symbols powerless against federal charges. They arrested my husband at the defendant's table. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something between rage and the dawning realization that his perfect plan had been destroyed by the pathetic wife he'd underestimated. The court finds overwhelming evidence that the petitioner has engaged in conspiracy to commit parental kidnapping, Judge Walsh announced. The petition for custody is denied. Full custody is awarded to the respondent pending criminal proceedings. She paused, her eyes finding mine across the courtroom. Mrs. Wright, I've seen a lot of cases in this room. What these people planned for your daughter is among the worst. You showed remarkable strength in gathering this evidence. Take care of that child. I intend to, Your Honor. The trial that followed was federal, moved to a courtroom in downtown Boston where they'd once tried mobsters and money launderers. The prosecutor treated my husband's crimes as personal affronts to decency, cataloging each stolen dollar, each fabricated video, each step of the plan to steal my daughter and disappear. I spent 3 hours on the witness stand. My husband's defense attorney tried everything, suggesting I was vindictive, that I'd manufactured evidence, that I was the real criminal who'd escaped justice. But the recordings spoke louder than any accusation. The elderly victims testified via video link. Mrs. Brennan, whose retirement savings had vanished into offshore accounts, wept as she explained she'd have to sell the house she'd lived in for 50 years. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan described trusting my husband with their grandchildren's college funds, only to discover the accounts had been empty for months. When Sophie's trauma specialist delivered her report, I sat in a side room watching through one-way glass. My daughter drew pictures at a child-sized table while the doctor explained that Sophie had known something was wrong for months, that children always know more than adults imagine. She told me that Daddy's friend Vanessa promised her ponies and beaches, the doctor testified. But she didn't want to go anywhere without her mommy. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. My husband received 15 years in federal prison. Vanessa got 12, plus permanent revocation of every financial license she'd ever held. The judge ordered full restitution to the victims, though everyone knew most of the money had vanished into accounts that would take years to trace. The divorce papers arrived 3 months after sentencing. His handwriting from the federal facility in Pennsylvania looked shaky, defeated. I signed with steady hands, feeling only relief as 12 years of marriage dissolved into legal paperwork. We left the brownstone 2 weeks later. The house had become a museum of bad memories, every room haunted by lies I hadn't seen, betrayals I hadn't suspected. The apartment we moved into was a third the size, a 2-bedroom rental in a building with temperamental elevators and thin walls. But when Sophie raced through the empty rooms that first day, her laughter bouncing off the bare walls, it already felt more like home than that brownstone ever had. Diane and I signed our partnership agreement in my new kitchen, using a card table and folding chairs as our office furniture. Mercer and Wright Financial Consulting specialized in one thing: helping women protect their assets during divorce, especially when financial abuse was involved. Our first client came through a referral. A pediatrician whose surgeon husband was hiding income in cryptocurrency. We found $1.8 million he swore didn't exist. Word spread. Within 6 months, we had more cases than we could handle. Women from across New England with the same story. Husbands who thought they were too smart to get caught. Sophie adjusted to our new life with the resilience that still amazes me. Her new school knew nothing about the scandal, nothing about her father's federal conviction. She made friends who came over to play in our small apartment, their parents grateful for a safe space where kids could just be kids. The walls filled with her artwork. Butterflies and rainbows and, occasionally, something sadder that reminded me healing wasn't linear. Piano lessons continued with Mrs. Park from the community center instead of the expensive private instructor her father had insisted on. Sophie didn't seem to notice the difference, filling our evenings with scales and simple melodies that sounded like hope. He wrote letters at first. I recognized his handwriting on the envelopes that arrived monthly, forwarded through my attorney's office. I put them in a box in my closet without opening them. Eventually they slowed to every few months, then stopped entirely. Maybe he ran out of justifications. Maybe he finally accepted that some bridges burn too completely to rebuild. Sophie asked about him sometimes, questions that had no good answers. Is Daddy really a bad person? She asked one night, curled against my shoulder in the bed that was ours alone now. I held her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes people we love make terrible choices that hurt everyone around them. Your father made some very bad choices, but that doesn't mean he never loved you. It just means he loved something else more. Will he come back? Not for a long time, sweetheart. She was quiet so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I'm glad I stayed with you, Mommy. 2 years after that terrible charity auction, I stood on our small balcony watching the Boston skyline turn gold with sunset. Sophie was inside practicing piano, a piece she'd composed herself, something beautiful and complicated that she'd be performing at the spring recital next month. Diane had texted about a new case, another woman who'd discovered too late that her marriage was built on financial deception. Another family we could help put back together. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, my ex-husband sat in a cell, still probably believing he was the victim. Somewhere in a different federal facility, Vanessa was discovering that beauty and charm meant nothing when you couldn't manipulate your way out. But here, in this small apartment with its second-hand furniture and gallery walls of a 7-year-old's art, we'd built something real. Not rich by any standard my former life would recognize, but wealthy in ways that couldn't be stolen or laundered or hidden in offshore accounts. The puppy Sophie, named Sunshine, a rescue mutt with too much energy and not enough training, barked at something outside. The piano music shifted to a lullaby I recognized from Sophie's toddler years. Something I used to sing when she couldn't sleep. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and justice, tap the like button now. My favorite moment was when the judge's face changed as the real evidence played. The moment everyone in that courtroom realized the truth. What was your favorite moment of justice? Let me know in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of strength and redemption. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another video.